Hello and welcome. I'm Claudia Rizzini. I'm the Executive Director of the Radcliffe Fellowship Program at Harvard University. Our speaker today is Maxine Gordon, an author and independent historian specializing in jazz and African American cultural history. Her academic career builds on a lifetime of experience with jazz management and production. Maxine's latest publication is the book Sophisticated Giant, The Life and Legacy of Dexter Gordon. Her critically acclaimed biography of jazz musician Dexter Gordon, published by University of California Press. She has said that Dexter, her late husband, began working on the manuscript prior to his death in 1990 and asked her to finish it if he could not. She did so in fine style, honing her skills to write the book as an African American cultural historian by earning a bachelor's and a master's degree focused on history of the African diaspora. In the course of her research, Maxine has been involved in many other projects. She has served as the senior interviewer and jazz researcher for the Bronx African American History Project at Fordham University, and a project director for Women Who Listen, an oral history project with women jazz fans. Maxine has also worked as an archivist and consultant and given talks around the world on jazz and African American cultural history. In her year at Radcliffe, as the Carl and Lily Pforzheimer Foundation Fellow, Maxine is working on a book called Quartette to tell the stories of 4 brilliant African American jazz musicians. She intends to fully address how the women were received in their time and how they're held in the popular imagination now by telling their stories within an intersecting framework of gender and racial identity. This year, Maxine will also be organizing and directing the Dexter Gordon Centennial Project, Dex 100. Throughout 2023, Dex 100 will commemorate the 100th birthday anniversary and the life and legacy of her late husband through a series of public and online virtual events and programs. I am delighted to welcome Maxine Gordon to the floor.
Aha, I needed a platform. Thank you so much for coming, fellows, and for wherever you are in the world for joining us. Thank you, Claudia. Glasses, here we go. Okay. I'm going to read part and then show you photos and videos. I would like to thank the Radcliffe Institute for inviting me here and for giving me the time and opportunity to work on Quartette and to learn from the extraordinary and brilliant scholars here. The amazing work of Claudia, Jen, who saved me with tech help, Sharon, Maria, and Elizabeth make life here welcoming and productive. I would not be here without support from Florence Ladd, Daphne Brooks, Brent Edwards, Jake Lamar, and Woody Louis Armstrong Shaw III. I am eternally grateful to them. When I was a teenager, growing up in New York City, we could go to the Village Vanguard and Birdland and sit in the listening section and pretend to be very hip and cool. We were jazz kids, and I always wanted to find a way to be around those musicians and the music. I did find a way in and became a road manager, actually Road Manager of the Year in 1976. Thank you so much. Producer, tour manager, grant writer, and anything else that was needed. I worked the jazz festivals and toured in Europe with some of the greatest musicians of the day: Gil Evans, Art Blakey, Dizzy Gillespie, Louis Hayes, Woody Shaw, and Shirley Scott. Just to name drop a little. I met Dexter Gordon when I was on the road in Europe, and that history is in Sophisticated Giant, The Life and Legacy of Dexter Gordon. My work here with the Radcliffe Fellowship is the natural next step in my path to tell the story of the people who have created the music I love. Quartette is the story of 4 women who teamed with talent and ambition, 4 who conjured lofty dreams, 4 who faced the kinds of unrelenting obstacles that would hinder all who dared to dream as they did. The quartet is 4 Black women born in the US between the years 1911 and 1934. They lived through the dark days of segregation, changes of World War II, and mid-century America. They were musicians, jazz musicians. They are 4 musicians with remarkable careers in the 30s and beyond, whose passion and determination fueled their flights in reach of heights of the definitively man's world of jazz. The odds against their success would demoralize, if not disqualify, almost any young woman despite her talent or passion. These 4 certainly knew that. Nevertheless, they prevailed. The women in Quartette speak to us in this moment of focus on the scope of Black women's cultural influence and as decisive contributors to the jazz canon and to the world. Many writers have said that their voices speak to them about their next book while they are finishing the one they're working on presently. That is what happened to me as I was doing the final edits on Sophisticated Giant, which was published in November 2018. I heard the voices of these 4 women and realized that I had been connected to each of them in one way or another for many years. In what seems like an earlier life, 1966, I read 4 Lives in the Bebop Business by A.B. Spellman, which includes interviews and biographical information on Cecil Taylor, Ornette Coleman, Jackie McLean, and Herbie Nichols. That iconic title, along with Blues People, Negro Music in White America, by Amiri Baraka, then named Leroy Jones in 1963, became books that every serious jazz fan read and discussed and argued about. Spellman's purpose was to give voice to musicians considered outside the commercial mainstream. Spellman writes, "I have tried to let the musicians speak for themselves as much as possible. When I realized I was hearing the voices in Quartette in 2018, I began wondering when the day would come that would see these 4 women jazz musicians telling their stories and speaking for themselves. Then I realized that only I could answer that question." Quartette is presented in a context that I am describing as jazz geography, which is a jazz interpretation of the work of Sylvia Wynter, the Jamaican novelist, dramatist, critic, philosopher, and essayist, and the essays in Black Geographies and the Politics of Place by Catherine McKittrick and Clyde Woods. Robert Farris Thompson always influences anything I do, and this idea is influenced by him with his philosophy of using the details of individual experiences of place as a framework for looking at the broader picture of the story. Specific locations add a literal dimension to this kaleidoscopic history. As an example, even visually in this talk, we follow jazz coordinates as we move from Pakistan, Oklahoma, the Bronx, Harlem, Sierra Leone, Kingston, and beyond. I will begin with Maxine Sullivan. Maxine Sullivan was born Marietta Williams on May 1st, 1911, in Homestead, Pennsylvania. She had a legendary career as a singer with her first hit tune, Loch Lomond, a Scottish folk song, in 1937. She toured with big bands and small jazz groups and appeared in films and in the theater on Broadway. Maxine Sullivan presented herself, as if by magic, with the discovery of an extensive collection of memorabilia in the Bronx that I was invited to curate. I first encountered her legacy when I was working with the Bronx African American History Project at Fordham University. When her home in the Bronx was sold, boxes of photos and documents were found by the new owner in the attic. The boxes were donated to the Schomburg Center for Research in Black Culture. I read about the donation in an article in the New York Times and contacted the archivist to ask if I could see what was in the treasure trove. Diana Lachetanere, okay, kindly allowed me and fellow archivist Ellie Tweedy to go to a basement storage space in Harlem and look through the boxes. Boxes are jewels to an archivist as long as they are not stored in damp basements with vermin. We opened boxes and found documents concerning the house that Jazz built, a jazz community center in the Bronx that Maxine Sullivan opened in 1975. We found letters and photos and handwritten documents to tell a story about Maxine Sullivan and her family and her dedication to the music she loved and had begun performing when she was a teenager in Pittsburgh. Okay. This photo, that was her, and this is her. In this iconic photo from 1958 by Art Kane, it's called The Great Day in Harlem. That's Maxine Sullivan on the left. And there are two other women in the photo, Mary Lou Williams and Marion McPartland, pianist. She was from England, and the legendary Marion McPartland. I always wondered about those kids, what happened to them. This is the basement. This is the glamorous life of an archivist. So this was the basement when we first got there, and here's an example of some of the items we found in the basement. And that's me. And Ellie Tweedy, my fellow archivist, leaving the basement with our friend Greg Tate. Okay. And I'm going to play a clip from the movie St. Louis Blues, 1939, where Maxine Sullivan sings Loch Lomond, her big hit.
Oh, you'll take the high road and I'll take the low road. I'll be in Scotland for you. But me and my true love will never meet again on the bonny, bonny banks of Loch Lomond. By yon bonny bank and by yon bonny brae, where the sun shines bright on Loch Lomond, where me and my true love were ever wont to gaze, on the bonny, bonny bank of Loch Lomond. Oh, you'll take the high road and I'll take the low road. I'll be in Scotland for you. But me and my true love will never meet again on the bonny, bonny banks of Loch Lomond. Was there that we parted in yon shady glen by the steep, steep side of Ben Lomond, where in purple hue the highland hills we view, and the moon coming out in the glow.
Okay, Maxine Sullivan. Next, we'll talk about Velma Middleton. Velma Middleton was born on September 1st, 1917, in Holdenville, Oklahoma. Holdenville was incorporated in 1898 as part of the Creek Indian Territory. Is Caleb here? I don't see him. Okay. Are you here? No. Thanks to Caleb Gale, who's not here, our colleague at the Radcliffe Institute, I have learned that Holdenville was a sundown town. A sundown town is a location where African Americans were not allowed to live within the city limits or stay overnight under threat of death. 35 miles to the north is Boley, Oklahoma, established in 1904, which was one of the largest and most thriving black towns in the country. Formed after the first Great Migration, Boley was founded on land that was allotted to Creek freedmen and owned by a black woman, Abigail Burnett McCormick. With the help of Kayla McFarlane, my brilliant research partner sitting there, right there, we are working on Velma's life in Holdenville and the history of her family's migration there from the South. This is an example of the influence of my fellowship on my work. It changes how I am thinking about Velma's life and history, and I'm definitely including this research in Quartette. Okay, here's Velma. I found Velma Middleton, or perhaps Velma found me, while I was doing research for Sophisticated Giant. I went to the Louis Armstrong collection at Queens College to see what I could find about Dexter Gordon's time when he worked with the great man in his band in 1944. There I met the incomparable Armstrong scholar Ricky Riccardi. When I asked him if he had any photos of Dexter with the band, he said he didn't think there were any catalog, but he would show me everything from 1944. In the first photo I saw, there was Dexter sitting at the end of the first row of musicians on an army base. So I guess it's obvious. That's Dexter Gordon on the end playing the tenor. I asked Ricky if he knew the identity of the young woman in the white dress standing in front of the band. He gave me that certain look that says, "You must be joking." Well, that's Velma Middleton. I was new to paying really close attention to Louis Armstrong since I was entrenched in bebop and all that followed it. But when I saw that photo and later received invitations to give presentations at Satchmo Fest in New Orleans, I became very deeply involved in Louis Armstrong's life and contribution to jazz. I recall what Dexter Gordon had said so often all those years ago. If it wasn't for Pops, there'd be no such thing as a jazz musician. I began to think about Velma and her 20 years working with Louis Armstrong, sometimes 300 days a year. When the tapes from conversations with Velma and Louis and the band were digitized and made available, I listened to a goldmine of hours and hours of her singing, talking, laughing, telling dirty jokes, and reading from Louis Armstrong's fan mail. Velma Middleton spoke to me loud and clear, and she will have her say in Quartette. So, the photo on the left is one of my favorite photos. This is backstage at Carnegie Hall when the band, Louis Armstrong Band, played with opposite the Benny Goodman Band. And this is Velma playing poker backstage on the break. So then you see life off the bandstand. This is how it was. And in the tapes that I've heard of Louis Armstrong talking about her, he said, "Don't play poker with Velma, she always wins." So, and that's her, you'll see in the video, sorry. And this is the cover of Jet magazine, which is a section of my book. So I'm gonna just say, I don't like it, and I discuss it, but it will be a section of my book. I don't know what she thought when she saw it, but anyway, it says, her 205 pounds don't stop her from great dancing and singing. So, okay, we'll move on. Okay, I'm going to play a clip from 1942. This is when Velma joined the Louis Armstrong Orchestra, and she's singing with a singer named George Washington.
swinging all day,
swinging on nothing,
swinging away,
swinging on nothing,
swinging I say,
swinging on nothing,
Lord, just swinging away,
swinging on nothing,
swinging for pay,
swinging on nothing,
swinging I say,
swinging on nothing,
Lord. Now get it.
La-do-la-do-day.
Yes, yes, go on and get it, 'cause I like to see you with it. Now hit it.
Ba-do-do-la-la-do-day. Don't tell me, George, I know that again.
Solid. Swinging away,
Swinging on nothing,
swinging I say,
swinging on nothing,
just swinging for pay,
swinging on nothing,
Lord.
Did you check the shoes? Oh, I forgot to mention check her shoes. She's dancing in her shoes. Okay, well, there's more Velma, but. Okay, next, let's talk about Melba. Okay. Melba Liston was born in Kansas City, Kansas on January 13th, 1926. She played the trombone, was the composer and arranger for Dizzy Gillespie, Quincy Jones, Mary Lou Williams, and Randy Weston, and many other artists. When she moved to Jamaica to teach, she wrote arrangements for Bob Marley. Okay. Melba Liston shared her genius through my work on Dexter Gordon for his biography. Melba has a chapter in the book entitled Mischievous Lady, which is a tune that Dexter wrote for her in 1947, which tells us something about Melba, right? I knew Melba because she and Dexter had been friends since she moved to Los Angeles when she was 10 years old, and he was 13, and began to study with the legendary teacher Alma Hightower. Dexter and Melba were in middle school together, and he said that she could read and write music before anyone else he knew. She taught many of her friends to read music and write arrangements. Many years later, Dexter and I traveled to Kingston, Jamaica, when Melba was living there and teaching music. She and Dexter played a concert together one night there, and then sat up all night talking about their years together in Los Angeles and laughing about all the musicians they knew and all the trouble they got into. Her stature as a trombone player, arranger, and composer is well known in jazz circles, but there's so much to learn from her life that I hope to share in Quartette. As Melba with the great Mary Lou Williams, and that's just a lovely photo. Okay. I plan to write a part of Melba's book, a part of the section in the book on Melba, on a tour she made with Dizzy Gillespie in 1956 to Iran, Lebanon, Pakistan, Syria, Yugoslavia, Greece, and Turkey. Greeted with enthusiasm and applause, Melba recalled the response of women in the audience. Quote, "They wondered about the male-female relationship in the U.S. I had lots of women come up to me in the Middle East tour, so-called Middle East, to find out how life was over here for women and how in the world I could be running around there traveling out single. I sort of seemed to inspire a bunch of the sisters over there to demand a little more appreciation for their innate abilities. There were two other women on the tour, Dizzy Gillespie's wife, Lorraine, and vocalist Dorothy Salter, who's in the famous snake photo. This tour gives another way of thinking about jazz geography, and I plan to include maps in the book and online, if they let me, yeah. Next is, this video is Melba with the Quincy Jones Orchestra on tour in Europe. The pianist was Patty Bone, who's not shown. There was one other woman in the band. They're playing My Reverie, a song written and arranged by Melba from a melody by Claude Debussy. Sorry, Melba. It's really hard to know how to cut that. She wrote the arrangement and she wrote the tune, so, you know, we'll move on. Sorry, Melba. Okay, so we move on to Shirley Scott. Shirley Scott was born on March 14, 1934 in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. She was called Queen of the Organ and played the Hammond B3 organ. Thank you, Gabby. She was a composer, band leader, and recorded at least 40 albums as leader and many more as a guest. She was a professor at Cheney University, the oldest historically black university in the US. And here's a photo of Shirley when she was 15, playing the piano, and I will find out who the others are eventually. And this is an iconic photo, 1955 in Philadelphia from a gig. Mr. C, it was his gig. On the left is Tootie Heath, the drummer, the youngest Heath brother, Shirley, and the tenor player, John Coltrane. Well, they all grew up together in Philadelphia, which I will write about in the book. Shirley Scott was my very good friend, and I've always known that I would eventually write about her. The tenor player Harold Vick once said that the two of us made one very together person. He was not too impressed with us on our own. Of course, he was kidding, or not. I have been collecting research on her life for a very long time. However, when I was in London in 2018, I discussed with Gilles Peterson, the acclaimed record and radio producer, the possibility of producing a reissue of Shirley's album, One for Me, recorded in 1974 on Strata East Records, a trio record with Harold Vick on tenor saxophone and Billy Higgins on drums. It was something I had always wanted to do, and I was now given the opportunity to work on it with the great people at ARC Records. I agreed to write the liner notes for the reissue, which put my mind back to 1974 and 1975 when I worked with Shirley on the recording, and then went on the road with her to Montreux, Switzerland, Barcelona, and Lisbon. I will tell the story of that trip in Quartette. Well, maybe not all of it. Shirley recorded over 40 albums as leader, and each album cover is a different idea of who she was according to the record label. They tried blonde hair, cute poses, African dress later. She never looked the same on any album cover. The record producer chose the musicians and the tunes, and she had no control over the music until we got the money together to do One for Me for the Black artist-owned label Strata East. It was the first time Shirley made all the decisions for herself, the musicians, the tunes, the studio, the cover. She felt like she was finally free from the business of music, or what I refer to as the political economy of bebop. So that's Shirley. And here's, this is from 1976 Barcelona. On that tour, I was on this tour that I'm going to write about. And just check her feet. When you see her feet, she's playing the bass line on the Hammond B3 organ. You don't need a bass player because she's playing the bass. Feet. Okay, that's Shirley. It goes on for, I think the tune's 11 minutes. Okay, so good, right? Okay, this is my publisher. Quartette is not a biography in the standard sense. The musicians will speak for themselves as I play the role of curator and guide. In all of my many travels and encounters with jazz people, the stories would unfold, and the airings of some of their tales would reveal other deep connections among their experiences and lead to more stories. Given the dark drama of segregation combined with what was considered natural male dominance in those years, in many cases it may seem miraculous that the women of Quartette were able to survive at all. Now they tell those stories of survival and triumph. There's nothing like a dose of unbiased, unadorned history to bring a clarity that helps reveal the structure of the present and adds groundwork for possibilities about the future as well. My goal is to present these artists as individuals whose musical gifts have so enriched jazz by exploring how they were received then and how they would be considered and held in our popular imaginations now, telling their stories within an interesting framework of gender and racial identity. As I have learned, fate will always step in and guide us onto the right path. I was looking for film footage of Louis Armstrong on his African tour in 1960 and found a silent newsreel from Pathé online. I bought it, and when I clicked on it, it was from Rhodesia in 1960. So far, I believe it is the final film of a performance by Velma Middleton. On the tour were Lucille Armstrong, Barney Bigard, clarinet, Mort Herbert, bass, Billy Kyle, piano, Trummy Young, trombone, and Danny Barcelona, drums. The film is from November 16th and 17th, 1960. 2 months later, on January 16th, 1961, Velma suffered a stroke in Freetown, Sierra Leone, and died there on February 10th. She was 44 years old. I think of it as a silent tribute to Velma, who lived the life she dreamed of living when she was a child in that sundown town. It's silent. Okay, that's it. Thank you. Okay.
Wow, thank you so much, Maxine. This was delightful. Reflecting on the time that you have spent researching these four incredible women musicians, how has their work inspired and impacted you? Sorry.
Well, okay. Thank you. I just want to thank the fellows for coming, and the way people were listening. It makes such a difference. And the last silent one reminded me of yesterday when one of our brilliant fellows gave a talk where he didn't talk. And I thought how powerful the silence could be. And you know, there's a moment in the, I will answer the question. There's a moment in that last silent film with a kind of fade of Velma, you know, which she fades. I mean, that's, and when I first got it, I was like, oh, where's the sound? But then I thought, because I kept watching it, it's even more powerful without the sound, you know. So, what was the question? No, I know the question. I think I know who asked it. You know, you totally change once you start research on a project. I mean, you think you have this really good idea, and then you start, and then you find out that it wasn't that good an idea. And then if you have people in your life, one of them's here, who says, nobody will read that. And, you know, you have to rethink it. And then new material appears, like because of the Oklahoma, I didn't know what a sundown, I mean, I'd heard of a sundown town, but if I'm talking about her life and she's born in a place where black people, you know, can get killed for being out after dark, maybe we have to say something about that. So it unfolds. The stories unfold and they change your life, and you can't sleep because now that I've heard them all speaking, especially Velma, she was like very rough on me about hurry up, get the deadline, move on, because she was, imagine you see her shoes and her clothes. She, in the US, she got dressed in the back of a bus, okay? They didn't have dressing rooms where they played. So, and she had all carried her clothes. I mean, there was a valet who carried the luggage, but I mean, you know, she didn't have you know, anybody. Anyway, so I hear it's changed me. Okay.
That's a great answer.
Thank you.
I have been to many jazz performances in the last year, bands big and small, and have yet to see a woman on stage. What obstacle, political or otherwise, do women jazz face today compared with women in your book?
I know who asked that.
Okay, don't say, just...
It's so funny because I can hear her speaking. Okay. Yeah, it's, we have a serious problem. However, there are women, young women jazz musicians working. They're not working in those, you know, traditional clubs, you know, that hire the names that they think, you know, will get men to come. I don't know. But, you know, we have at Berkeley, the Terry Lynn Carrington has the Gender Project, I'm not sure the whole name, very good. I went to a concert there, all these girls playing drums and teaching, Shirzette, her name is, excellent, you know, teaching, playing the drums, good example. And they work, but they don't work the standard venues, and it has to do with money and capitalism and who controls it and who owns the record companies and the clubs, and they're all white men, so that answers that question. Sorry.
That sounds familiar. It sounds familiar.
Yeah.
Let's see. What kind of lessons can women of jazz from 50 years ago teach us today, given the situation that you have just described?
Oh, yeah, there's a lot to learn from them. First of all, if we think about them traveling with men, I mean all men, Velma, traveled with big bands, you know, Dizzy's band, Quincy Jones' band, I think there's one other woman. And Velma, she was, unless Louis Armstrong's wife went, she was the only woman. So there's always this question comes up, and I get it as a road manager also, about being protected from bad behavior, what we call bad behavior was worse, of men. And then, you know, thinking about it and learning about them, they and I have always had backup. So, for instance, Shirley's older brother, when she worked in Philly, he just sat right there, you know, with her. And when we traveled with her band, we had Harold Vick. He was taller than Dexter Gordon. I mean, he was over 6'6", so nobody bothered us. And Melba, you know, she had Dizzy, you know, watching her and stuff, which later I see young women they go into a situation, but they don't have the same backup. You know, it's like, you know, if we had a problem in Philadelphia, you know, we call Oscar Fuller, he'd wait there. Somebody would come to help us before things got bad. And now I don't see it organized where you have someone watching to make sure that you don't have problems with men. And so I think we could learn from them, and like the picture of Velma backstage playing poker, you know, they are not gonna mess with Velma, okay? So, you know, this thing about being tough or loud or, you know, maybe it's not a bad thing.
Yeah, occasionally. The next question is about your experience and somehow follows up from this question. I imagine your own experience as a woman road manager was as interesting as the musicians. Did other women do what you did? Will you include that in the book? So were there other women managers?
What was that? No, you know, I was asked actually to write, oh, you know, instead of writing about Dexter Gordon, why don't you write a memoir, you know, about your life? I was like, well, it's not that interesting, first of all. And second of all, what I know I cannot tell. So they're not all dead. Some of them are living, you know, I know them. And I'll just tell you, one of my close friends was the great pianist Cedar Walton, and he passed. And before he died, which like a week before he died, I didn't know he was that sick. I went to the Village Vanguard, where I've been going since I was 15, and he said, oh, I want to tell you something, and which was not like him. And he said, I want to thank you for all you've done. And I was like, well, I didn't do anything. I just wanted to, you know, be on the road. And he was like, no, you never repeated anything you heard or saw on the road and when you were the road manager. And I was like, well, first of all, I can't remember. And second of all, I don't care. So, no, I'm not included. You know, I feel fortunate that I did that, and there mostly were men who did that work in that time in the 70s. But, you know, I got to hear all this great music and tell people what to do, and, you know, they listened. You know, it's like, I'll hold your passport. Now, like, I took a job recently for somebody who's 85, and I couldn't say no, and I was like, I'll hold the passports. We went to China and Japan, and those guys were like, you're gonna hold my passport? I don't think so. But in the earlier time, they'd be like, oh, good, then I won't lose it, you know, so.
Okay. Yeah, that's, yeah. Beyond your beyond your personal connection to them, did these women know each other? Did these four women know each other?
Wait, I'm working on that. Okay. So yeah, that's something I want to write about. Now, of course, I found a photo of a concert that Maxine Sullivan's on with Dizzy. So we know that she performed with Dizzy, and Melba's in the band. So, okay, and there's that. And I think Shirley's younger, she's born in 34. But I sort of think in 1959, before Velma died, They could have been in New York at the same time because of the appearing at the Apollo. And Shirley was working at Count Basie's club. So anyway, I know they passed each other over the years, but not, you know, they didn't have time really to hang out. But, you know, some people, you know, like Shirley was close to Ella Fitzgerald, you know, some women got
So
to
they
be.
surely knew about each other.
Oh, of course.
Okay,
Yeah.
that's great.
And they would have gone to hear each other,
Of course.
but you know what I mean.
Yeah.
I'll
We don't know
know
if they were friends
by
and-
the deadline.
Sounds good. Let's see. This is interesting. Did any of the women described their experience performing in front of predominantly white audiences?
Yeah, you know, that's so funny. Because when I was a road manager, I said once to Dexter Gordon, you know, it's kind of weird in Europe, you know, you look out and it's all white people. He said, they're not white people. They're French, and they're Swedish, and they're Danish, and they're Swiss. He said, you're not, in the US, they're white. You know, that, and he was like, you're thinking in a very narrow way. So, you know, I still thought it was a lot of white people, but he made a very good point, you know, that when you see the audience in Lausanne and, you know, with Melba, with Quincy Jones, an all-black band, Quincy, maybe he used to have one white guy, so they couldn't say he didn't hire white people. But, you know, I saw that audience and I had that moment again, like, oh my God, all those white people. And then I heard Dexter say, you know, you're so US-centric, because he had lived in Europe 14 years, and so he, you know, you're Italian, you know, I mean, you're not
Definitely.
white. Okay.
Oh, okay, let's leave that for another day. Can you speak briefly about what kinds of feelings you experience when you go through the archives and do this work?
Oh, I cry.
Yeah, that's
You
a
know,
common
sometimes I cry,
yeah.
because when I just found, when I was working on the PowerPoint, the picture of Shirley at 15, which is in a file because she had a court case at the end of her life. She took a diet drug called fen-phen, and she wasn't fat. She thought she was fat. And so it was prescribed, and she died from it. Okay. So before she died, there was a court case, and the lawyer who won this big settlement for her gave me in Philly he moved, he retired, all boxes of all the files from the case, interviews with her and everything, but I couldn't open it for a long time. And then when I was working on the book proposal, there was like, there's a big folder of photos, and, you know, then I'm ridiculous, I'm crying, you know. And because so angry that she took that pill. But in my office here in Byerly, I said, okay, let me look at the photos, see what I have. And I found that one. So, you know, it's what we call, what happens when you do historical research is they will find you. And when I was working on the Dexter Gordon book, he had said, you know, my grandfather was a Buffalo Soldier, you know, and I was like, well, you got pictures? No, there's no pictures. And then when I was in the Schomburg and I saw this book on Buffalo Soldiers, I asked the librarian, could I look at that? She said, oh, we just got it. No, it's, you know, I said, well, could I just look to see if there's this person, Captain Baker? And when I opened it, was the photo of Dexter's grandfather looked exactly like him. Okay, so to me, if you do this research properly, they will help you. Yeah.
So this is all we have time with. Thank you so much
Good.
for
Thank
your
you,
presentation and answering our
Claudia.
questions.
Yay! Okay.